The night was dark, and a cold wind howled through the narrow streets of Chippenham. Inside the mead hall, King Alfred of Wessex sat among his courtiers, laughing and drinking, unaware of the shadow that crept closer with every passing moment. Suddenly the doors burst open, and a horde of Viking warriors, their eyes glowing with bloodlust, charged in. Swords clashed, and the air was filled with the screams of the dying. Alfred, caught off guard, barely managed to escape with a handful of loyal followers. They fled into the night, their hearts heavy with the weight of betrayal and the stench of death. The Vikings, led by Guthrum, had struck with cruel precision, seizing the heartland of Wessex and driving the king into hiding. For Alfred, it was a moment of utter despair. His kingdom, once a beacon of hope and resilience, now lay in ruins. The mead hall, where he had celebrated with his people, was now a place of horror, stained with the blood of his friends and subjects. Alfred and his small band of loyalists fled to the marshes and woodland wastes, moving like ghosts through the night. They knew that Guthrum and his men would be searching for them, and they had to stay hidden. The once mighty king now lived the life of an outlaw, constantly on the run, unsure of whom to trust. In the marshes, Alfred found a small, isolated island called Athelney. It was a place of refuge, but also a place of planning and preparation. Here, Alfred and his men fortified the island, creating a base from which they could launch surprise attacks and gather intelligence. The king, though broken in spirit, was not defeated. He knew that this was his last chance to save his kingdom. Meanwhile, in the heart of Wessex, the Vikings ruled with an iron fist. They burned villages, plundered farms, and terrorized the people. Many of the landowners, seeing no hope of resistance, submitted to Guthrum as their new lord. The situation was dire, and it seemed that the age of independent Anglo-Saxon kingdoms was coming to an end. But in the darkness, heroes emerged. In Devon, a group of King's Thens and their households, led by a local ealdormen, routed an attack by a Viking force from Wales. The defenders, using the ancient earthwork of Countisbury Hill, slaughtered over 800 of the enemy and captured the fabled Raven Banner of Ragnar Lothbrok. It was a small victory, but it gave the people of Wessex a glimmer of hope. Alfred, too, was not idle. He and his men launched raids to gather supplies and harass the Viking forces. They moved stealthily, using hidden paths and the cover of night to stay one step ahead of their enemies. Alfred's leadership and determination inspired his followers, and they began to believe that victory was possible. One day, while hiding in a swineherd's hut, Alfred found himself daydreaming by the fire. The housewife, unaware of his identity, scolded him for letting the cakes burn. It was a moment of humility, a reminder that even a king could be reduced to such a state. But it also showed that Alfred, despite his hardships, remained a man of the people, capable of understanding their struggles and sharing in their hardship. As the weeks passed, Alfred's network of partisans grew. Ealdormen Athelney of Somerset joined the cause, helping to defend Athelney and gather more supporters. The king knew that the time for a decisive strike was approaching. Finally, in the 7th week after Easter, Alfred and his followers rode to a traditional rendezvous point called Ecgbyrth Stone. Here, they were joined by men from Wiltshire, Somerset, and Hampshire. The army was small but determined, united by a common cause and the belief that their king would lead them to victory. Alfred led his army northwards, and just 2 days later, they faced the Viking forces at Edington. The battle was fierce, shield wall against shield wall. The West Saxons, driven by their love for their king and their homeland, fought with a ferocity that surprised even the battle-hardened Vikings. After a long and brutal struggle, Alfred's men drove the enemy from the field. The victory at Edington was a turning point. Guthrum and his men retreated to their fort at Chippenham, but it was only a matter of time before Alfred's forces surrounded them. After a 2-week siege, Guthrum capitulated. In a symbolic act of submission, he agreed to be baptized, taking the Christian name Aethelstan. Alfred stood as his sponsor, and the new converts wore their white baptismal robes for 8 days. The treaty that followed marked the beginning of a new era. Guthrum agreed to leave Wessex and withdraw to his lands in East Anglia. The Danelaw, a territory where Danish law and customs could be expected to apply, was established, but Wessex remained free. Alfred's leadership and the courage of his people had saved the kingdom from certain doom, but the fight was far from over. The Vikings, though pushed back, were still a formidable force. The king knew that the path to a lasting peace would be long and difficult. Yet, for the first time in many months, Alfred and his people could look to the future with hope. The night of blood had given way to a new dawn, and the King of Wessex was determined to see his kingdom rise again. In the 860s, the north of England faced a dire threat. A Viking army, led by Halfdan, was ravaging the banks of the River Tyne and battling the Picts and the Britons of Strathclyde. After defeating the local forces, Halfdan turned his attention to York. This ancient city, known as Eboracum during Roman times, was a center of learning and culture. However, it fell to Halfdan, who then divided the region among his followers. The Vikings began to settle and farm the land, marking the start of a new era in York's history. Around the same time, another significant event was occurring. Rollo, a Viking leader, invaded Normandy in France and established a new duchy. This event, noted in the Peterborough Chronicle, highlights the broader impact of Viking expansion across Europe. For the people of northern England, the fall of York was a devastating blow. The city, which had been a symbol of Roman and Anglo-Saxon civilization, was now under Viking control. It was renamed Jorvik, and for nearly a century it served as the capital of a Viking kingdom. The region between the Humber and the River Tees saw a series of Viking rulers, each vying for power. Some, like Guthrum, had connections to Viking Dublin, while others, like Halfdan, were local warlords. Despite the turmoil, York remained a prosperous city. Archaeological evidence shows that the Vikings fortified the city, repaired the Roman walls, and built a grid of streets and plots. They established a thriving commercial center, importing goods from Scandinavia, the Rhineland, and even the Far East. York's workshops produced a variety of items, including leather goods, textiles, and metalwork. The city's mint was also active, producing coins for both Anglo-Saxon and Viking rulers. However, the political landscape was complex. In 899, when Alfred the Great died, his son Edward the Elder took the throne. But Edward's cousin, Ethelwold, challenged his rule and sought support from the Vikings. York initially welcomed Ethelwold, but his rebellion was short-lived. The Vikings, including Halfdan II, continued to play a significant role in the region, but their power was often contested. In 937, Aethelstan of Wessex defeated a combined force of Vikings and other enemies at the Battle of Brunanburh. However, after Aethelstan's death in 939, Olaf Guthfrithson, a Viking king from Dublin, reclaimed York. His successor, Olaf Sitricsson, was soon ousted by Edmund of England in 943. The last Viking ruler of York, Eric Bloodaxe, was a notorious figure known for his fierce battles and brief reign. He was driven out of York by King Edred in the mid-950s, marking the end of Viking rule in the city. North of York, the region of Cumbria saw its own struggles. The Viking invasions disrupted the Northumbrian control over the Britons of Cumbria. In the 10th century, a series of rulers known as the Kings of the Cumbrians emerged. Their origins and identities are debated, but they likely had connections to the British kingdom of Strathclyde. The region's fate was eventually determined by border conflicts, with Cumbria remaining part of England and Strathclyde becoming part of Scotland. Meanwhile, the monastic community of St. Cuthbert, which had fled from Lindisfarne in 875, found a new home in Chesterless Street and later in Durham. This community, rich in land and tradition, played a crucial role in the religious and political landscape of the region. The bishop and community of St. Cuthbert eventually moved to Durham, establishing a powerful religious center that would influence the region for centuries. Alfred the Great, the King of Wessex, was a key figure in this period. He prevented the complete subjugation of Anglo-Saxon England by the Vikings. The Battle of Edington in 878 was a turning point, where Alfred's forces defeated the Vikings and secured the survival of Christian civilization in England. Alfred's reign saw the strengthening of Wessex and the development of a united kingdom of the Anglo-Saxons. Alfred was born in Wantage, Berkshire, in the 840s. He was the youngest of 5 sons and had little expectation of becoming king. However, he began his public life early, witnessing charters and learning the skills of leadership. Alfred was a passionate learner, interested in literature, history, and philosophy. He insisted that his children and the sons of noblemen learn to read and write in both English and Latin. His love for literature and his commitment to education helped shape the cultural and intellectual landscape of his kingdom. Alfred's early life was marked by his father's travels and his own exposure to the court. He learned the art of hunting, weapons handling, and horse riding. He also developed a deep appreciation for literature and poetry, often memorizing epic tales and lays. His early education and experiences prepared him for the challenges he would face as king, including the Viking invasions and the need to rebuild and strengthen his kingdom. Alfred's reign was marked by his efforts to fortify Wessex, establish a navy, and promote education and learning. He translated important works from Latin to English, including the Psalms and the works of Boethius, and encouraged the development of a written legal code. His legacy as a scholar king and a defender of Christian civilization ensured that his influence continued long after his death. The period of Viking rule in York and the north of England was a time of conflict and change, but it also saw the emergence of new cultural and economic centers. The resilience of the Anglo-Saxons, led by figures like Alfred the Great, ensured that their civilization and traditions would endure. Simon Keynes, a historian, has shown that an old manuscript in Brescia confirms that Alfred, who later became the King of Wessex, made 2 trips to Rome as a young boy. The first trip was in 853, when Alfred was sent ahead of his father, Aethelwulf, to announce that Aethelwulf would be visiting. During this trip, the Pope honored Alfred by dressing him in special clothes, similar to those worn by Roman consuls. Alfred remembered this as a royal consecration, a special ceremony that made him feel like a prince. 2 years later, in 855, Alfred returned to Rome, this time with his father. They were received by Pope Benedict III with great honor. Aethelwulf brought many gifts, including a gold crown, a gold-bound sword, and other valuable items, to show his respect to the Pope and the Church. The Pope treated Alfred as a spiritual son of the papacy, which likely made Alfred feel important and connected to the Church. On their way back from Rome in 856, Aethelwulf and Alfred visited the court of Charles the Bald, the ruler of West Francia. Charles arranged for his daughter, Judith, who was about 12 years old, to marry Aethelwulf, who was in his 50s. The marriage was a big deal because Judith was crowned as queen during the ceremony, which was unusual for Wessex. This might have worried Aethelwulf's sons, especially Aethelbald, because a new queen could have a child who might take the throne from them. When Aethelwulf returned to Wessex, he faced a rebellion led by Aethelbald, his eldest son. The exact reason for the rebellion is unknown, but it might have been because of Judith's new status as a queen. Aethelwulf eventually retired to Kent with Judith, and Aethelbald took control of Wessex. When Aethelwulf died the next year, Aethelbald married Judith to neutralize any threat she might pose. This was unusual, but didn't seem to cause much trouble with the Church. After Aethelbald's death in 860, Aethelbert, another brother, became king of the entire kingdom. He ruled until 865, when he died childless. Aethelred, the next brother, took the throne. When Aethelred died in 871, he left behind a baby son, Aethelwold. Since it was too risky to have an infant king during the Viking raids, Alfred became the sole king of Wessex. The ceremony in Rome when Alfred was a boy had a big impact on him. He later performed a similar ceremony for his grandson, Aethelstan, giving him a scarlet cloak, a belt with gems, and a gilded sword. Alfred saw himself as a champion of civilization, defending Christian values against the pagan Vikings. He was inspired by the stories of ancient Rome, especially the story of Boethius, a Roman philosopher who wrote a famous book while in prison. Alfred translated this book and saw himself as a modern Boethius, fighting for the right cause. Alfred's coin designs from the 870s also show Roman influence, with designs copied from Roman coins. This was a way for Alfred to connect his kingdom to the traditions of ancient Rome, which he admired. The Life of Alfred, King of the Anglo-Saxons, Vita Alfredi Regis Anglo-Saxonum, is a book written by a Welsh monk named Asser. Asser was invited to Alfred's court to teach him Latin, and became a close friend. The book covers Alfred's life from his birth to 887, 12 years before Alfred's death. It includes many details from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a series of historical records that Alfred possibly supported. Asser describes Alfred as a saint-like figure and emphasizes his love for learning and the importance of the English language. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is a collection of historical records from 494 to 1154. It is a valuable source for understanding Anglo-Saxon history, especially the reigns of kings like Alfred. The Chronicle was likely started during Alfred's reign and was written in Wessex, possibly in Winchester. It was used to boost morale and pride in the West Saxon royal house during the Viking invasions. In the 870s, Alfred began to use the title King of the Anglo-Saxons, which showed his desire to unite the different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. He also minted coins that represented him as the king of both the Saxons and the Mercians, signaling a new era of unity. Alfred's reign saw a lot of cultural renewal, with a focus on promoting the English language and literature. He and his advisors worked hard to create and spread new texts, which helped to restore the glory of Anglo-Saxon culture. By adopting the title King of the Anglo-Saxons, Alfred not only strengthened his own position, but also laid the foundation for a more united and culturally rich Anglo-Saxon society. King Alfred's reign was a time of great change and growth in England. He recognized that learning and education were vital for the survival and prosperity of his kingdom, especially after the Viking invasions had left the land in disarray. Alfred understood that to revive the kingdom, he needed to bring in the best minds from across Europe and beyond. Winchester, the capital of Alfred's kingdom, became a melting pot of cultures. Scholars from continental Europe, such as Fulco of Rheims, Grimbald of St. Burton, and John the Old Saxon, brought with them not only their knowledge but also valuable books. These scholars played a crucial role in Alfred's cultural reform program. They helped translate important Latin texts into Old English, making them accessible to a broader audience. Welshmen, Frisians, Irishmen, Bretons, and even Scandinavians were also drawn to Alfred's court by his reputation for generosity. Among the scholars who worked closely with Alfred was Werfurth, who translated Pope Gregory's dialogues at the king's request. Plegmund, a learned man possibly from Cheshire, was another key figure. Alfred appointed him Archbishop of Canterbury, and Plegmund would later officiate at the coronation of Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, in 900. Plegmund also helped Alfred with the translation of Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care, a book that was central to Alfred's cultural reform. In the preface to the Pastoral Care, Alfred expressed his deep concern about the decline of learning in England. He noted that in the past, scholars from other lands had come to England to study, but now England had to seek help from abroad. He emphasized the importance of translating important Latin texts into English, so that more people could benefit from them. Alfred believed that young men of free birth and ability should learn to read English, and if possible, Latin as well. He established a school in the royal household to educate his sons and other noble children, as well as some boys of non-noble rank. Alfred's cultural program was unique in Christendom. While other countries, like Ireland, had a tradition of vernacular writing, none had undertaken such a comprehensive effort to translate important works into the vernacular. This program was not just about education. It was also about strengthening the kingdom. By boosting the dynasty and engaging his subjects in the common good, Alfred aimed to rally his people against the heathen invaders. The influence of continental scholars on Alfred's program was significant. For example, the Carolingian Renaissance, which had benefited from the contributions of Anglo-Saxon scholars, now returned the favor. However, Alfred's approach was different from the grandiose and ornate style of the Carolingian courts. Alfred's books were practical and meant for widespread use among courtiers and clergy, fostering a dialogue between the king and his subjects. One of the most iconic objects from Alfred's time is the Alfred Jewel. Found in the marshes at Athelney, it is believed to have been a reading aid or eastel, used to guide readers through texts. The jewel, with its intricate design and the inscription, "Alfred had me made," is a symbol of the king's commitment to learning and education. Alfred's building program also left a lasting impact. He constructed fortified towns or bars across the kingdom to protect his people from Viking attacks. These bars were not just military strongholds, but also centers of trade and administration. The royal halls and chambers built during his reign were marvels of construction, combining stone and wood in innovative ways. To govern effectively, Alfred needed a well-organized system. He viewed wealth as a tool to maintain loyalty and service. He rewarded his nobles with land, weapons, and gifts, ensuring that they would support him in war and administration. Ealdormen, the principal administrators of shires, were appointed by the king and held significant power. They were responsible for leading their followers in war, maintaining public order, and overseeing the construction of roads and fortifications. Alfred's court was a hub of activity, with the king surrounded by his nobles, churchmen, and other important figures. He divided his staff into groups that served at court for 1 month, and then returned home for 2 months. This system ensured that the king had a constant flow of fresh ideas and support. The king's reeves, or local agents, were crucial in maintaining the king's presence in the countryside and ensuring that the king's interests were respected. Alfred's cultural program required a lot of scribble work. Scribes were essential for copying charters, letters, and other administrative documents. The king's scribes were organized into teams, with some working on master copies and others responsible for distributing them. Alfred's translations of important texts, such as the Pastoral Care, Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, and Augustine's Soliloquies, were widely distributed among the bishops and parish clergy. Alfred's love for the dialogue as a literary form is evident in his works. He adapted Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, creating a dialogue between the author and lady philosophy. This book, which became one of the most popular in the Middle Ages, reflects Alfred's deep interest in wisdom and his commitment to learning. Alfred's relationship with the church was complex. While he respected the church's role in his kingdom, he also asserted his authority over it. By the late 700s, the church had accumulated vast wealth and land, but the Viking invasions had weakened its influence. Alfred's appointment of Asser as Bishop of Sherborne without papal intervention, and his later division of the see by Edward the Elder, show the growing power of the king over the church. Overall, Alfred's reign marked a significant period of cultural and administrative reform. His efforts to revive learning, strengthen the kingdom, and engage his subjects in the common good laid the foundation for the future success of the English monarchy. King Alfred's England was a place of great change and challenge. After years of Viking raids and the loss of several English kingdoms to the invaders, Alfred, the King of Wessex, emerged as a leader who not only defended his land, but also laid the foundations for a stronger, more united England. One of the key tools in Alfred's toolkit was land. In the old days, kings would reward their loyal followers with land, which was like giving them a paycheck. But Alfred couldn't do that as freely because the Vikings had taken a lot of land. So when he could, he would take back church lands that the Vikings had seized and give them to his supporters. This was a smart move because it helped him build a loyal army and maintain peace. Alfred's law was a bit different from what we think of as law today. When someone was accused of a crime, they didn't go to court and present evidence. Instead, they would swear an oath in front of God, and if enough people backed up their story with their own oaths, they were considered innocent. If you couldn't swear an oath, you were outside the law and in big trouble. But the king's word was powerful, and Alfred would sometimes step in to make judgments, even just while washing his hands in his private room. He believed that those in authority should be able to read and understand the laws to make fair decisions. Alfred's vision for a well-ordered kingdom extended to the city of London. By the 880s, London was a mix of the old Roman city and a newer settlement outside the walls. But after a series of Viking attacks, Alfred decided to rebuild and fortify the city. He made it habitable again and brought in people to live there. By the end of his reign, London had transformed from a scattered settlement to a bustling city with a grid of streets and a strong defense system. Preparation for the next Viking invasion was a major focus for Alfred. He knew the Vikings' tactics. Well, they liked to set up bases and raid the surrounding areas before fleeing. So, Alfred created a network of fortified towns called burhs. These were spread out so that no important place was more than a day's march from a burh. Each burh had a garrison, and the people nearby were required to help maintain and defend it. This system was so effective that when a large Viking force arrived in 892, they couldn't penetrate the kingdom as easily as before. Alfred also reorganized the army. Instead of calling everyone to fight, he created a standing army that could be ready year-round. He divided the forces into two groups, one for fighting and one for farming. This way, there was always a ready force to defend the kingdom. Alfred's army was so well organized that no king in his line died in battle, despite often fighting at the front. To protect his kingdom from sea attacks, Alfred built a navy. He designed ships that were longer, faster, and more stable than the Viking ships. These ships were crewed by Frisians and English sailors, and were funded by designated estates. This navy was crucial in repelling Viking attacks and protecting the coast. By the end of Alfred's reign, his kingdom was stronger and more organized. He had created a system of laws, rebuilt cities, and established a network of defenses that would protect his people. Alfred's legacy was not just in the battles he won, but in the foundations he laid for a more stable and prosperous England. His son Edward would build on this foundation, expanding the kingdom and continuing the work that Alfred had started. Alfred's vision of a united and well-defended England lived on long after his death.